And we are recording and streaming on Thursday, December 5th, 2024 at 12:06 p.m. Eastern Time with Major Fred Galvin and your book, A Few Bad Men. That link is in the description. Last time we talked more about, I don't know, kind of everything, creation of the Marine Corps and all that jazz. But I told you I was going to read the book, and I did. That link is in the description. You can go get it on Audible. Great listen, great narration, and yeah. So it kind of I feel like it's the tale as old as time. But I think it's what I think a lot of people, or at least a lot of the guys I know who serve, there is that feeling sometimes of like you've given your life to it, and then you get stabbed in the back because it's politically expedient for someone else. And God willing, the truth comes out and you know, you're expunged, but not you specifically, but you do kind of have that there is no worse feel like you said, it's, it is the family you didn't have, and then they turn around and no matter what, no matter what our own military says, it's always wrong. And then no matter what the enemy combatant says, they're always right. It's like the idea you're a straight white male, therefore you're wrong. And it's like, well, no, that's not the case. And if you're not straight white male, then you're always correct and you're infallible, which is also not the case. And that's not limited to just, I don't know, the general populace. That's even limited to, or not unlimited to, MARSOC. So, with that, Major Galvin, please introduce yourself while I post around the live link.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Tommy.
Yes, sir.
I'm Major Fred Galvin, U.S. Marine Corps retired, and originally from the Midwest, specifically there in Kansas, Eastern Kansas. And I joined the Marines right out of high school, served for 27 years, and wrote a book called A Few Bad Men Ambushed in Afghanistan and Betrayed in America. And I'm sure many people can relate to this, not specifically being ambushed in Afghanistan, but whether it's a relationship they were in, whether it's a family situation, whether it's a work situation. I was just reviewing this story. You've probably heard, Tommy, about Jamie Dimon and how he was betrayed when he uh, built the Citigroup empire with
No,
Sandy
I haven't.
Weil.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so the book isn't about others outside of our situation, but I think many people can relate to that because it is a story about, as it says in the subtitle, about betrayal, ultimate betrayal, when somebody is that close. And Jamie Dimon had worked with Sandy for 15 years, and he was basically his second in charge. And he hired Sandy's daughter, and after so many years, 15, he fired Jamie Dimon. But the book is about redemption, and just like in Sandy's or Jamie Dimon's situation, he's able to persevere, and that's that kind of mindset that you have to have in your darkest hours, where we were being looked at for mass murder. They alleged we killed Afghan civilians in this village, that we got out of our vehicles, that we were drunk. The Afghan allegations were completely not only absurd, but they completely contradicted each other. And our American generals knew that, as you've read, Tommy. They had all of our sworn statements. They had my polygraph. They had statements of 79 Afghans. You can read those statements in Appendix 3 in the back of the book, A Few Bad Men. And Tommy, as you know, whether you're the head of a large Fortune 100 company, or you're a 3 or 4 star general in the Pentagon, or down in Tampa in the Central Command in charge of Middle East wars, you're not an idiot. But people wanted to betray, and they wanted to eat their own. And that sounds like, come on, you're really stretching it there. But when you read the story and you see how the Marine Corps had experimented in World War II with the Marine Raiders during the Roosevelt administration. The Marine Corps did not want that. They disbanded the Marine Raiders with a stroke of a pen after 3 years, actually, sorry, 2 years of Marine Raiders fighting successfully in the South Pacific during World War II. They signed a letter saying it's not in the best interest of the Marine Corps to have an elite within an elite. So the Marine Corps has always considered itself above the Army, because of greater discipline, greater training, higher standards. And for the most part, when you look at holistically of the conventional Marine Corps versus the conventional Army, that is true. Um, so having us being ordered by Dr. Rumsfeld in 2001, he was the Secretary of Defense. This was his second time. He'd been at the tail end of Vietnam in 1975. He'd been the Secretary of Defense then as well. But and he saw, as a former naval officer, Dr. Rumsfeld knew that to go after guerrilla forces, you need small, elite, highly trained forces to destroy an insurgency. And so he gave the order to increase the capacity for all special forces in all of the U.S. military branches of service. The Marine Corps is the only one that didn't have forces that they had contributed to the U.S. Special Operations Command when it was founded in 1987. Another data point as far as, hey, we don't want to contribute that because we're all special. And in a way, the Marine Corps made a decision that makes sense because we are a very small organization, the Marine Corps, comparatively. And they had the mindset, if we're going to man, train, and equip and pay these forces, then we're going to be able to use them. We don't want to have some joint force, a Navy SEAL or Army Ranger or Army Green Beret use those forces, and we are left with nothing except for the bill. So on a business perspective, it made sense. But when you look at the overall national defense strategy, that is not the way that the senior civilian leaders wanted it. But as we've seen in 2001, when the Marine Corps made their decision to withhold contributing forces, as well as we've seen here in the last 2 years with, last 2 years that we've been funding this war in Ukraine, and last 3 years since this war in Afghanistan ended. The true story, Tommy, as you know, is the tail and the Pentagon wags the dog in the White House. So even though, as we've seen, Joe Biden ordered the withdrawal of all American forces from Afghanistan 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, the Pentagon says, okay, you're the boss, you're the commander in chief, you can do that, and they'll quietly find another more profitable proxy war that we've sent in shorter amount of time, hundreds of billions, so much so that we can't even keep track of. There's bills being passed as we speak right now to give more, like $46 billion more to Ukraine, and they're trying to rifle these things through before January 20th, which is that in the best interest? I mean, well, we see Governor Shapiro signing his name on warheads that are being given to Ukraine and being fired with ATACMS missile launchers into mainland Russia, and that's being seen by the Russians, rightly so, as provocative, and they've responded with non-nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles, as well as saying that, if this continues to happen, these kind of missiles being fired into Russia, they will they have the right to respond to with nuclear force. So this is not in America's best interest. And we've seen this. Our Pentagon is complicit in this. And, Tommy, I'm sure you have friends, you have family who are between the ages of 18 and 39 who could be recruited. And if there's a large war, as we've seen right now, we've really hit the bottom as far as recruiting over the last several years, and that could lead to a draft if we are at war, whether we get sucked into a war in Eastern Europe, potentially in the Middle East again, whether that's with Gaza, Lebanon, or something in the Persian Gulf with Iran, and that could divert attention, which could trigger responses in Northeast Asia with China taking Taiwan or someplace else like the Philippines in addition to Taiwan. So we're in a very, very volatile state in the United States right now. And I would submit all this rhetoric that we hear, oh, Pete Hegseth, but I'll tell you what, Tommy, as you've seen, we've hired 2 4-star generals in the last 2 administrations and neither were successful at what they were tasked to do. And we've seen, the failure in standards, in morale, in recruiting under General Mattis. And we've seen the situation right now with retired four-star General Lloyd Austin. A year ago, I mean, I don't know, Tommy, you're there on the East Coast. You could probably speak better on New Year's Eve parties, but I doubt Lloyd Austin probably was tying a big one on last New Year's. But what he did or didn't do as far as show up for work, and said made up some story, is it's recorded in the media that he was having elective surgery, and it turned
Surgery.
out to be emergency prostate cancer. And then he said he was working from home, and we found out he was at Walter Reed Medical Center. Those are false official statements, and that's from the senior civilian leader in our Pentagon. And you kind of have to wonder if he's actually not at work, and his deputy, Mrs. Hicks, she was down in Puerto Rico. Who's running the show? And my whole point in saying this in your opening is, we have a responsibility to provide competent commanders and the best leadership to our American sons and daughters who are in uniform serving our country at great risk. And I hear a lot of rhetoric on the left saying, make any accusations, whether it's Pete Hegseth or Ron DeSantis or whoever else President Trump decides, but it just literally could not get any worse. I mean, that's a bold statement, I shouldn't say, but it's been very bad. And, when President Trump gave the order that he did not want to allow, because it wasn't allowed previously, so he's just continuing on with the policy of not allowing transsexuals in the U.S. military. General Mattis did a legal review for 2 years. So you have somebody directly and intentionally defying the direct lawful order of the President of the United States for whatever agenda, I don't know. But you see this type of mindset in the deep state, and that's what needs to be cleaned out. And that's what I believe this President-elect Trump is learned lessons from the past, and is going to make sure whoever he puts in those roles will take a huge fire hose and do a deep cleaning of, the lowest point there in DC in the swamp is the Pentagon. They are very entrenched, and it needs to be cleaned out. We are not successfully promoting the very best when we have a non-combatant evacuation operation like we did in Kabul, and how that was conducted was totally against our doctrine of only going down to one airfield. That's not how we do business. And also the failed execution of that, where you line up and you categorize. And I've done these non-combatant evacuation operations. That's what Marines are known for, is going around on ships and pulling Americans out of hot spots. But we have a legal requirement to categorize people. I know that sounds racist or something, misogynist or bigoted, but we have an obligation to, and everybody on the left says, I don't like Trump's, rhetoric of America first. Well, you probably think different. If you were an American in Kabul and the Taliban was coming over the wire, you probably would want to be America first. And that is how the Department of State and the Department of Defense has always categorized American citizens during evacuations. But that's not what we did. You saw 646 Afghan civilians lined up and put into a U.S. Air Force C-17, evacuating, some falling off of that. But the Americans were not the first to be evacuated. They didn't even find most of them. And that's a failure on our strategy, of which Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has gone out and said this was successful. Hey, General, a little reminder here, it's not the quantity that we're after, it's the quality. And because of that failed strategy and the lack of quality, and you can try to blame it on Trump that, 8 months before, he had some strategy. Well, you have plenty of time to do whatever you want. And we plan non-combatant evacuation operations on ships in a matter of 6 hours. That's the standard in the Marine Corps. 6 hours from receipt of the warning order that we're going to do this, to include a non-combatant evacuation operation, to boots ready to launch. So when you have 8 months, you got to look at the man in the mirror and Roger up to say, hey, who's really accountable for this? And that was our generals. They failed, and that has led to embarrassment on a much, much larger scale. It led to the Russian invasion into Ukraine, has led to increased tensions in three large scale exercises in surrounding Taiwan just this year, flying through their airspace, completely enveloping Taiwan. We know one day this will probably end up in um, seizing Taiwan. And then obviously we've seen this administration just days after, look at the tail of the tape, days after the 7 October attacks against Israel, this administration gave $5 billion back to Iran. And that has led to the the Pentagon used to be very transparent, Tommy, as far as the amount of American casualties, both wounded and killed in different theaters like Iraq and Afghanistan. But only 4 months after the 7 October attacks in Israel, um, all that transparency went away. But there's a report that your listeners can go on, um, Google search the military times, 13 February attacks against Americans. So just within the first 4 months after we had given money back to Iran, we had Iranian backed militias in Iraq, where we still have U.S. forces. They had attacked 170 times, and which led to 186 casualties, Americans, either killed or wounded in Iraq and Syria, just within the first 4 months. And how much after that, we don't know, because the Pentagon is not releasing any of those statistics, but those are real people who have real sons and daughters, who have parents, who have wives, have husbands, and they love this country. And that is not being reported because of what's going on in the Pentagon. So my whole saying is, yes, we have leaders that are choosing to lead this certain way. And just before coming on the show today, I was listening to an old statement of leadership from the former Secretary of Defense and Colin Powell, retired four-star general. And he's just talking about leadership, and Colin Powell actually got it. He has it in spades. He knew, and he was trained well, and that's what we need in the military right now is a good clean washing. We need leaders to return who are not going to buckle when it comes time to, we've seen, if we can't fight a war directly, we start a proxy war, and that makes a lot of money. If you're a retired general like General Dunford or General Mattis on the boards of Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics, I mean, this is a revolving door. Let's call it for what it is, Tommy. It's the No General Left Behind program. In these military industrial complex, they don't feel sorry. These generals aren't out on the street collecting their $207,000 annual retirement pension. And these corporations are just sad that these generals have no place to go. That's not the case. They're basically buying these generals for access and placement to be able to get into the Pentagon, because I can't get in the Pentagon, even retired, even having a security clearance that's still active. I can't do it unless you're retired. That's right, 010, retired four-star general. You can go into the Pentagon, and they do. And they also have these relationships with members of the House. That's most important because they're the ones that control the funding, as well as the Senate Armed Services Committees. And those are the ones, the Senate, that approves, just like these nominations in this next cabinet, but they approve the promotion warrants, the promotion lists, I should say. And the military, as we've seen, has not been promoting the very, very best. They promote actually from the middle third of, they break your leadership into thirds. They want people who will buckle. They want people who will give in when something questionable comes along, and they need to, whether it's acquisitions or some of these social engineering programs that have came down the pike. They don't want somebody that's saying, stop, let's do some evaluation, let's use comments. You're part of the problem if you do that, and they won't promote you. They want people who clearly know that the military is their family's best benefits package that they would ever be able to get. And those are usually not your top performers. Those people will get out and they will find some other opportunities, whether that's in the entrepreneur space or and the private sector or nonprofit, they will find something that is their new mission and they will succeed. But the military has, I mean, you look at who's in there right now, it's a joke. It's absolutely, it's a, we've got problems, Tommy. So that's my open, sorry for being long-winded.
Nah, dude, it's awesome. It's doing my job for me. I was gonna say one thing I've often thought about, and I don't want to, because I've never served and because I've never met any of these people, I don't want to wrongfully accuse people of something as if it's fact. But for lack of better words or names, someone like General Mattis or John McCain or whoever, and you go, how can they do this? I've often thought, I wonder if kind of going through the military and, like you meeting with the World War II guys, kill them all. I wonder if there's almost as like a natural kind of emergent selection process where, you rise up when you are just you're less bogged down by, I don't know, being wishy-washy. It's shoot him in the face, move on. And it doesn't make it right, but just to try to understand it. I wonder if that's what gets you to the level of being, like a mover and shaker in the military industrial complex. Like if you have made tough decisions, like a few good men, you want me on that wall, you need me on that wall. I wonder if that's what leads to them being able to make the decision to, hey, we're going to go give 100 billion to Ukraine because the Afghanistan thing is over. If that sort of ruthless, just kill, move on, if that then carries over to the sort of higher level stuff where it's like, man, you're putting Americans' lives at risk. And in their life, they've learned, and it's been a positive feedback cycle that, hey, the more ruthless I am, the more I gain. On the battlefield, it means that you don't die or take fire, and it might kind of keep going to where, it's like a dinosaur. It's like they keep getting bigger, and it's like, well, the biggest ones keep eating everyone. So it is working out for them. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just what it is. I wonder if when you see kind of these vet guys who become politicians or contractors or something, I wonder if it's their entire life. It's, hey, the more ruthless you are, it increases your chance of survival. And it's not good. It's, you die the hero, live long enough to become the villain. But I've often wondered if that's what leads to. It's like, how can you go into the military industrial complex and sell a fake war for money? And it might just be, fuck you, I'm getting paid. And it's to remove all morals and ethics, evolutionarily, that is that is the survival of the fittest. Doesn't make it right. You could also say that Stalin or Hitler or Mao were survival of the fittest. Technically, Jeffrey Dahmer was. He killed a lot and didn't get killed. So it doesn't make it right, but just to try to understand it, or like you meet, or that guy, it's like, dropping
Like
the J.
George Soros,
Yeah, yeah, or yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
that, or what you're
he
saying.
said,
You're sorry.
yeah, George Soros said, hey, they asked him in interviews, you've probably seen this, where they said, don't you feel any remorse? I mean, you're Jewish. You gave the Nazis the locations of where other Jews were hiding. He flat out said, he goes, no,
Best days of my life.
he goes, if I didn't do this, somebody else would. It's, he had no remorse. So somebody like that has no conscience. That's a sociopath.
Yeah.
And these generals are the same. When you see a couple incontrovertible facts, Tommy, is when you look at, I'll name some names, like the colonel, he was later promoted four-star general, John Nicholson. When he retired, he got on the boards of both PenFed as well as he's the chief executive for Middle East operations with Lockheed Martin, the largest defense contractor in the world. So he's over there with his new wife in Abu Dhabi with Lockheed Martin, as well as the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff before General Miley, General Joe Dunford, who's a four-star retired Marine. He's at Lockheed Martin. You see General Mattis, he's with General Dynamics, retired four-star general. And the current uh, Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, he right before he went back to the Pentagon as a civilian, he was working with Raytheon. So what do all four of these four-star generals have in common? Well, I'll say two important facts. Is one, they all have the same occupational um, job that I had, and we all started out as infantry officers. And these are people that one thing they do not have anything in common. When you look at Raytheon, General Dynamics, Lockheed, these are companies that sell missile systems that like the ATACMs, so manufactured. These are the missiles that are being shot into Russia by Ukraine. Lockheed Martin makes them. These shoulder fire rockets, that's a joint venture, Tommy, between Raytheon, where Lloyd Austin, the current Secretary of Defense, he just came from Raytheon. Do you think he's got any vested interest in there? And Lockheed Martin. But these sophisticated systems that are guided often by lasers, GPS, and high speed rockets, these are not programs, nor is, and I'm going to get to General Mattis again in a second because what he did was even more corrupt, but they are not hiring people who are subject matter experts in aviation, communication, hypersonic missiles. They are hiring people based on their access and placement, not on their knowledge and experience. And you saw this again when General Mattis, before he even left active duty as a retired four-star officer, he was the commander. I asked your viewers to look this up. He was the commander of all forces in the Middle East, what we call the Central Command, CENTCOM, down in Tampa, Florida. He was sending these emails, and your viewers can look this up. He was advocating while on active duty to the Pentagon, sending emails saying, we've been at this for a year. He's specifically talking about this company, Theranos, who had this young, lovely lady, Elizabeth Holmes, who was allegedly the youngest American female billionaire. She dropped out of Stanford, wore the Steve Jobs black turtlenecks, and was oohing and ahhing everybody. But she caught the attention of General Mattis, and so much so that Mattis was sending emails to the Pentagon saying, we've been at this for a year. Tell me which obstacles need to be removed. Now, if that isn't coercion, and the real obstacle, General Mattis, is something called the Food and Drug Administration, because when you're selling products that test the blood of our lads and you were trying to force to have this tested in Afghanistan, why? I don't know why, but why did you, as soon as you retired, become a member of the board of directors for Theranos? I mean, you don't have a PhD in epidemiology. I mean, let's get some things straight. The largest employer by headcount in the United States, even if you took the second and third employers by headcount, Amazon and Walmart, and combined their headcounts, you still do not have the same the amount you have with the Department of Defense when you add up all the active, reserve, National Guard, contractors, civilians. National Guard or the Department of Defense is huge in America, and she knew who to court, and she courted him. And here he is using in testimony over 2 years ago to the United States Congress about the failures of Theranos, which it did fail. It was found to be a fraud. They frauded investors, and it is now in default. And Elizabeth Holmes has been indicted. But when General Mattis was testifying before Congress, he got his golden parachute and said, I didn't know. Well, you can't use that excuse if you're a board member. You have a fiduciary obligation. You're hired to get the access into the Pentagon, and you better know what's involved in this organization because it's going into the bodies of American service members, and that's what they're paying you to know about. But nothing happened to him. He's still back on the board of General Dynamics, getting paid over $1 million a year. It's all about money and power. Do these people need to teach like General Petraeus at New York University? Does General Mattis need to teach at Stanford? No, it's about money and power. And these are who we are promoting. And, when I see news organizations, and I say that phrase lightly, but when they bring people on like General Petraeus, who, when he was a four-star general over in Afghanistan in charge of all U.S. forces, he was married, he had children, he brought in a reserve female major at the time. She was married, she had children, and he had her write his book, and he had an affair with her, and he shared classified information. And anybody else in theater, do you think when Petraeus was in charge of all forces in Iraq, and then he was in charge of the U.S. Central Command, all forces in the Middle East, and then when Obama fired General McChrystal from Afghanistan, they sent Petraeus over there. So he was in charge of all forces in the Middle East, and they have these rules like there's no sex in theater. So when people get punished, their career is over. But did that happen to General Petraeus? No, they fined him for divulging classified information above the classification level of what his paramour, his mistress had, but they didn't get him for adultery. And as a retiree in the military, you're on a pension. You can be called back on active duty, and you just see this. There is no there's no accountability in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which we that applies to retirees such as myself. If you slander, that's called contempt. You can be brought back on active duty. But you saw Petraeus and Mattis right after Mattis got fired that summer. They're both within a week of each other writing hit articles in the Atlantic magazine. But Tommy, have you heard anything from these two retired, experienced four-star generals on what has been happening with the withdrawal from Afghanistan? Have you heard anything about, how America has this amazing capability, missions that we used to do in force reconnaissance and marine special operations as far as in extremis hostage rescue? I mean, we have not done anything as far as attempting to militarily rescue our hostages held in Gaza right now. Um, there is all we have is talk, and talk does not work ever very well with terrorist organizations. But my point is these generals. And the point of my whole conversation, Tommy, is we need fresh blood in leading our national defense strategy. We need to have people who will be uncompromised. And whoever that is, I know President Trump will sign someone who will build a team of people who will not buckle, who will uh, be straight shooters. And hopefully we see who that is soon. And that person gets um, approved by the advice of the Senate. And then we turn our Pentagon completely around because it's in need of a huge uh, shower.
Billy Fred. Yeah, it's yeah, if I don't do it, someone will. That is, and I often do this on the podcast. I always have to make the disclaimer just because I'm like entertaining an idea doesn't mean I believe in it. It's just a mental exercise. But I mean, it's like looking at, I don't know, the Soviet Union and America's so corrupt and they're fat capitalist pigs. Well, why does it work? Well, it's because you can make money. You can get a couple shekels. All right. Well, greed pushes the entire standard of living upwards then, the American economy versus the Soviet economy. And you could purity spiral and be like, well, there are greedy capitalists. And it's like, yeah, the overall quality of life is better. I've tried to understand, because the easiest explanation is just to say they're evil. I've tried to understand, why has the military industrial complex arisen so powerfully here? I mean, empire's not new. Sure, you could say the U.S. is, two oceans around. Okay, sure, so it can't be toppled as easily. Giant economy, relatively large population. Is this the is this the survival of the fittest in terms of like meta structures of everyone gets their beak wet, so everyone keeps coming back to work, and it's evil. But make note, it's pushing missiles to make money, and it's vaporizing some kid in Yemen. Yeah, that's evil. That is unequivocally evil. But just purely trying to it's like what they say about surgeons. Surgeons aren't allowed to operate on their own family members because their emotions get in the way. They got to be removed and just look at it like they're a mechanic. They come in and this guy's bleeding out. All right, we'll go in, do our best to fix it. You don't get sucked up into, oh my God, somebody's bleeding. It's just cool, calm, collected. Like emergency, yeah, emergency surgeons are crazy. That's how I'm trying to look at this, is not get sucked up into this is evil, this is good, or this is just for me personally, I'm trying to understand it, and I have for a long time. And the best I can, the closest approximation I can get to is the most, like you said, bigger employer than Walmart. the most number of people are making money off something, and not only are they, it's a double-edged sword. Not only are they making money off selling things, what are they selling? Shoes, rubber bands? No, missiles, things that you can also use to go conquer territory. It seems that it's almost like a natural end state of, I guess, societal evolution. It's a military industrial complex. The most number of people have a vested interest in it continuing, and then the very product they create, is used to bulldoze people who get in the way. And it's an organism. And look what happens when, Kennedy talks out about it. They blow his head off. It's, no new wars for Trump, and they steal the 2020 election and try to blow his head off a couple months ago. It seems like it's like, why are there McDonald's everywhere? It's because everybody likes McDonald's. It's more of a reflection of us. And I've tried to understand, why has this arisen here and risen so, just like a leviathan. And that's the closest I can get to, is like, enough people have nice townhouses because of the military industrial complex, and therefore it will continue. And it's fucked. It's utterly fucked. But that's like the closest, again, trying to be like a surgeon. I'm just not good, not what is bad, but not good, not bad. Just remove myself and coldly
Yes,
look at it and go, why is this I don't care, just why is it happening?
yes,
I think that's what it is. The most number of people
I
have
believe you're right, Tommy.
have a nice SUV because of it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, when you say the most number of people, I'd like to, and I'm kicking myself because right before I sat down for this interview with you, I was like, do I need my notebook? I left it at my desk, but
Yeah, go
I
grab.
wanted,
You can go grab
uh,
it. I don't care. I can vamp.
well, I'd have to stumble through, but since you say,
Go
give me
for it. No,
just a
I'll
second.
hold it down. Yeah, no, I'll hold it down. Yeah, for everybody listening, that's one thing I've thought about before. There's a great book. I don't think it's Kill Chain. I think it's a different book, but it's this guy. I read it last year. He breaks down the military industrial complex like it's an organism, and an organism that moves to more nutrients, and it kills external threats, and it evolves in ways it needs to. And he lays out a pretty solid argument that it is behaving like an organism. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a head to it that's consciously doing it. In the same way, I'm not consciously beating my heart, but it's a super complex system, and it feeds on financial energy. It feeds on rare earth minerals for electronics, and it feeds on, you know, legislative power. And when people speak out against it, it sends its white blood cells to it, and it blows their head off like Kennedy, or it slanders them like General Smedley Butler, or it steals an election like Trump. And it's a black mold. And to ever bring it back down, we have to at first understand what it is, and that's where I'm trying to get to it. Did you find it?
I did. Thanks,
Yeah.
Tommy. And when you talk about whatever's greatest provides the greatest good for the largest number of people, it brings a big contrast between the last two administrations, or the current and the last, between Biden and Trump. So, just a couple data points. When the New York Stock Exchange opened in 1817, and then you fast forward 200 years later, and you had President Trump inaugurated the 45th president in January 2017. You take that unit of measure, that 200 years of U.S. equity history, and what Donald Trump did in the first 3 years of his administration to the, I'm just going to talk about the Dow Jones Industrial Average. He is one unit measure that first 200 years of all those presidents prior to him, he increased that unit of measure 65%, not 65x, but 65% in the first 3 years. Now, this is, we know what happened in the beginning of the third year was COVID. So I'm not factoring that in because that's an outlier, an anomaly that really skews things. And of course, I'm using statistics to show that when President Trump got up there and said to the American people continuously, "You're going to be so tired of winning. You're
You're
going to
gonna,
say stop
Mr.
winning."
President, Mr. President, I'm so tired.
And when he would get on television, national television, and they'd have the S&P or the Dow ticker, and in 1 hour you'd see that go up. Obviously, it was lower levels than it is right now, but it would go up 700 or 1,000 points sometimes in 1 hour. That is because the American people had confidence, and that is this broad rally in the markets. Now, we've seen here in this last year, if you, Tommy, if you got the whisper on the Magnificent Seven, or until just recently it was six until Tesla got back in included in Magnificent Seven. But if you were lucky enough to get into Microsoft or Apple or Nvidia, but most people weren't. Most people are going to work and they don't, they've heard about this, but they got in too late, or they bought it when it peaked, and they pulled back and they got out. So not everybody has made this kind of money unless you were a member of Congress trading because you have all this inside secrets.
Insider
But
trading.
here's the actual data when I talk about the military industrial complex. I did some analysis of the Trump administration, his entire 4 years compared to these first almost 4 years we're closing in on right now of the Biden administration. And there is an electronically traded fund, an ETF, that measures defense and aerospace. It's called the ITA, and your listeners can Google search India Tango Alpha. But in the Trump administration, that went up 27% in 4 years, or an average annual of 6.75. So it underperformed the Dow and the S&P over that 4 year period. So you were lagging compared to the major U.S. equities. But during this current president, we had the ITA so far has gone up 77.7% in not even 4 years. So even less time, this has gone up significantly higher. So this has gone up 19.25%, or over 3 times. And these are the defense and aerospace companies. So overall, when you factor in all of the companies, not that all of them are are winners, but it's gone up 3x of what Donald Trump did. So you can see where the money has gone, and it's narrowly gone into some of this high tech, and it's gone into defense. I mean, there's ways to make a horse race rigged. And when you have this great narrative, hey, Tommy, have you heard about AI? And I'm not just talking about making your emails good, but AI is going to be the future. So it sounds great, but what is it doing right now but that's been this narrative and the psyop to boost Nvidia and Microsoft and Apple, to achieve some of those record gains. But most Americans, and that's why I believe is a huge contributing factor to this most recent election, most Americans' net worth and purchasing power has gone down over the last 4 years due to inflation and everything that Joe Biden campaigned on. He said, oh, Trump's talking about a V-shaped recovery, a big bounce for the whole broader market. It's a K-shaped recovery. Only the people at the top of this K, the elite, are getting the big bounce. Everybody else is. Well, that's what Joe Biden said. Strangely, that's exactly what he delivered. Where if you were you had this, Union Bank of Switzerland account and wealth manager telling you that, hey, we've got these stocks, and yeah, you've been doing great if you got in on Microsoft and Nvidia. But everybody else that's nose to the grindstone and working, you probably aren't as better off now as you were in 2020, 2019. Now, if you're one of these retired generals and you don't just have the stock, but you're paid in stock options, you're paid in both, actually, or salary, stock options. I mean, you're raking it in. This is a heyday. And, when you wonder why people, would go to the extremes of, not just having an actual assassination attempt multiple times, but people going on the air prior to that and saying, this is the end of democracy. This is, stoking these type of situations. That's really immoral. And that is not what we need. And you see that the hypocrisy, the lies, people right now there's people talking about who in 2028 they're going to run, whether it's AOC. Well, why would they even concern themselves? Because their whole narrative in the left media was this is going to be the end of democracy. So there will be no elections according to what they themselves, not anyone, in the GOP has been saying that. They know who they're going to, oh, is it going to be Donnie Jr. or who's going to run after Trump? Because there will be an election, on the 20th of January. Whoever's writing Trump's speech will not say anything about him being a dictator. It's just, these lies, the same thing that 8 years ago they were saying. I have some friends on the left who are very intelligent and on both coasts who are saying, hey, guess what? Uh, Trump is a Russian agent. It's these narratives that people are really falling for, Tommy. I mean, it's absurd that intellects could actually. I mean, I have a friend who's um, I won't say the full, but he's related to one of the great um, philosophers of all times, and he is an intellect. He's very successful, but he believed that Trump was a Russian agent, and that's the narrative. And so we need to have accountability in our government, in our media. When people say things, the current laws, if you say things and somebody is a public figure, that's what allows the Inquirer, but it also allows mainstream media to say and get away with the same. It can be complete lies, like saying this is democracy's on the ballot, and of course they don't believe that. But it's really a shame that no one's held accountable. I'm sure you've seen probably one of the greatest movies of all time, 300, where the Spartans like in Sparta, we hold people accountable for their words. And well, why don't we in America? If somebody like Joe Biden says that he graduated with all these degrees and he was a scholar and this and that, and he will not pardon his son no matter what. He's saying that multiple times. His staff is saying that, and then he's saying he's the most decent person. Well, decent people, which was what the Biden campaign, they campaigned on decency. I mean, decent, the apples don't fall too far from the tree. Your son is who he is because of the father, and you should take some responsibility. And if he commits a crime, he should do the time. When you go around saying, no one is above the law, and the whole left media says, he's so great, he's putting the law above all else. Well, it's hard to see how anybody can, really believe those news organizations. And again, I say that lightly, when there's no integrity in the news at all. Nobody's challenging him on saying that, or his press secretary. It's sad. So
To then approach the idea, well, not idea, the reality of kind of the military industrial employer is the way to counter it. Take that old story in the Soviet Union, that gas pipe was on fire for like 1,000 days and they couldn't put it out. So they finally detonated a small tac nuke, like zero point 0.5 kilotons next to it, and it put it out because it stole all the oxygen. Is the only way around something like the military industrial complex and the amount of wealth it generates for the most number of people, not just most number of people, but wealthy people who are in positions of power who again can then make the system use their power to push the system further. It's not that they're all door greeters or construction workers or like me have a podcast. It's people in the halls of power that can then perpetuate the system. The way it might not be to break it up, and I look at it as a comedian Duncan Trussell used to say, he's like the Constitution's great, the Bill of Rights is great, but it is a Rubik's cube, and it took a while, but given enough years, decades, centuries, the monkeys will figure out the Rubik's cube, and we did the checks and balances, and eventually we have a continuity of government or military exception or emergency or DEFCON. You eventually find ways to. It's a great system. It's the best to date. But I would say, I would argue that it's kind of gotten figured out, right? Now, Trump tried to address that in his first administration about, the waiting period, the number of years after you leave office that you can go into a related business or vice versa or whatever. I feel like it's probably not going to be you could, break up the military industrial contractors, but in enough time, the monkeys will figure out the puzzle. It might take 10 years, it might take 50. They'll figure out the puzzle again, and we'll eventually get back to forever wars. And 50 years is good. If you can get 50 years, go for it. But it might be that the way to be around it is, and I think this is what you were kind of saying with, the 1817 to 2017 and then 2017 to 2020, the move might be to, instead of trying to dismantle that, as noble as that would be, it might be more advantageous to instead build something larger, the tactical nuke next to the gas line. It might be that if you rise all, the rising tide lifts all ships. If enough people, if we're saying the military industrial complex is so powerful because the most number of people are making the most amount of wealth, then you might fight fire with fire, make more wealth for even more people doing something else. Is that
Yeah.
anywhere close to what you're getting
Yeah,
to?
and that's what
I
I
don't
was
want to
trying to
put words in
relate.
your mouth. Okay.
Yeah, I believe the Trump administration had the greatest breadth across all of the four major U.S. indices. More people were gaining wealth than now you have military industrial complex. I mean, who knew that Raytheon? I mean, did anybody get the word about Honeywell? I mean, very few people watched, and these things just overnight, boom. Well, of course, when they're providing all kinds of programs and training to um, foreign countries and allies and partners across the globe. But most people aren't in on those whispers. So what we've seen is this dichotomy of dialogue where Joe Biden was saying, "Oh, Trump's talking about a K-shaped recovery," and that's exactly what Biden brought. Trump did bring this V. It even after this first 3 years, 65% of this first 200, that was a huge rally. But then it tanked because of COVID, and then it just bounced, and it even surpassed that. But a lot of that was quantitative easing and the Fed getting in there and propping things up and creating conditions that led to inflation. That's a whole nother subject. But what we saw was, yeah, Biden got in there, and in less than 8 months, he ordered and executed this failed withdrawal. And then that did, as you said, these monkeys will figure it out. They really quickly rotated the Rubik's cube, and voila, now we have Ukraine.
Yeah.
This money ball that's bigger than what Tom Cruise could have ever imagined. I mean, it's just like this dream come true that only a few people get in on. I mean, you're just, like the Wolf of Wall Street. You're just raking it in and laughing the whole way.
It it is, in terms of like respecting your enemy. It is the next. You got to give credit where it's due. It's the next evolutionary step in the forever war. It's it's Ukraine. Okay, we're not sending any Americans. There's probably, I would imagine, advisors there covertly, but
Yes.
there's no. You're not getting the imagery of the body bags coming home. Vietnam was 58,000, and even just 10% of that in the Middle East, it's still a bad taste in the mouth. Again, I'm just trying to look at it as a psychopath. Yeah, I would look at Ukraine and I could just, it's like the meme of like the Mad Men where he's got like the thing, he's pointing at it. It's like, get this, it's a new idea. It's like forever war, no white teens coming home in American flag draped coffins. It's all
Right.
the same money, but no one here is losing anything. And you go, well, that's not a half bad idea. And we're giving them money, but they have to buy our weapons.
Mitch
Okay.
McConnell's
And
even on the record saying
yeah.
that
Oh
with the
yeah, no,
Senate.
and we're gonna sell our old munitions, which by the way we can't use anymore because they're clusters or they're depleted uranium. We're gonna sell those, and we're also gonna make Europe start jacking up their production lines and automating and standardizing, which they did early last year. And well, they're probably gonna want to buy some of our stuff because if they give all their old F-16s, they're probably gonna need some F-35s, so they're gonna buy those from us. And they're F-35s, meaning that they're using our stuff. And if, hell freezes over and Europe ever decides to turn on America, we have the back door to all their weaponry. So we're giving them things that only work when we want them to. And all the while, and there's no Americans coming home in body bags.
Yes.
Hey, man, if I'm that demon in like a three-piece suit, I'm going, this is good. This is the next evolution. This is the
Yes,
iPhone after the flip phone. And then
you're
after
right,
this, it will
Tom.
be something else. It will be we're not even sending money anymore. We're just sending software code to run drones. Like but it is an evolution. It's a product, no different than an iPhone or a car or a computer. It is a product, and the product is the Department of Defense making money and accomplishing physical goals in the three-dimensional world around the world.
Yes,
It's a product, and it's again, it doesn't mean I'm condoning any of it. It's clearly evil, but you have to understand it before you can even begin to figure out the Rubik's cube. You have to first understand what it is. It's a puzzle in the shape of a cube. Okay, got it. You can't be colorblind. You have to see. Okay, got it. You have to understand what it is to even begin to address it. And I think that's what it is. Is this is the next step? It's this, and we're going to replenish all our stuff with new stuff. We're also getting a lot of R&D. Think about Nevada test site, how much money, we'll put into doing, the proving grounds, the missiles, or even the early nukes where we build up those entire towns just to see which paints lit on fire faster. What's better R&D for drone swarms than you don't have to use crash test dummies. These are real people in Ukraine. They have self-preservation instincts. They're getting so much valuable R&D off seeing what works. They're going, okay,
yes,
trench warfare is coming back, okay. Nets around tanks, okay. EMP, okay. FPV drones, okay. We can now take out a $10 million APC with a shape charge on a shitty quadcopter. It is an absolute buffet in the most, and then so there's no such thing as a free lunch. Where's it all coming from? Well, it's being paid for by the literal meat grinding of young Russian men
yes.
and young Ukrainian men who probably don't even speak English. And
Yeah.
it's evil, but that's what it is.
You bring up this topic that is really interesting and some of the background. We've mentioned Mitch McConnell saying, hey, it's all, American companies primarily,
Oh,
and there's companies
and I
all around.
forgot. Sorry to interrupt. And I forgot. And there's $10 trillion worth of rare earth minerals in Ukraine that we can't let Russia get their hand. I mean,
Yes,
it's sorry, keep
that's
going.
the real reason. And, when you do this magic trick of misdirection and you focus on this quote unquote just war over in Ukraine, let alone we have wars going on, in Africa. You have genocide going on there. You have the Uyghurs being rounded up and experimented on in China. These don't get any kind of media attention at all, and that's been going on much longer in larger scales. Ethnic cleansing is what that is, but there's no money to be made. Trying to fight China is, I believe, the United States realizes probably be a losing battle, trying to go in there. And there recently, China came out with these four red lines, and one of them was, any amplification from the United States of human rights violations. So we have this whole misdirection, like a magic trick, like just look over here in Ukraine, and this is a just war, and we have all, we have to do this. Well, is there evidence that what Joe Biden is saying that this could spread to the rest of Eastern or even Western Europe when you see countries much closer in proximity, whether it's Italy or Poland, not even giving $1 billion into NATO? And if the United Nations and NATO really wanted to do something that is productive, this whole narrative in another theater there in the Middle East where all these civilians are being killed in Lebanon and in Gaza, and you have these Americans protesting, this, if you stop thinking about the problem and look at solutions that the United Nations did in 1983, they sent in Marines into Lebanon. Now, I don't like how that ended, obviously, because that killed
They
Americans at our embassy, killed 241 Americans at the Marine barracks. But Americans and multinational forces have, in the past, created cantonment areas and let fighters fight fighters. You can put civilians into an area and control it if you don't want to have civilian casualties. That can be done. It has been done. But, right now you have these uh, American kids and people are all around the world that have been brainwashed to the psyop that Israel is just killing, slaughtering civilians, that there's a just war, the Ukrainians. I mean, these are wars to go on forever. And, trying to use diplomacy and have a two-state reach, that we've tried that so many times and it's never worked in the Middle East. So let's stop kidding ourselves and let's figure out a way to, if there's people that want to fight, and Hamas and Hezbollah, they want to fight. Well, let's get it on, as they say in the UFC. And but let's remove the civilians from, like what you see Hezbollah does. Same thing with Hamas, is they put their command and control headquarters below a school, and they'll put their weapons, to include rockets, in a hospital. They fight in the dirtiest ways. Well, you can do something about that, UN. But their answers, they're always coming up with, they're presenting these cases to condemn Israel. It's and I know we're bouncing around on different subjects, but there's a lot of magic misdirection on what's right and what's wrong. And the real big picture is, if we get too focused in some of these smaller wars, and I don't believe that America, and I think we're like this close to being in a World War III, because if we get decisively engaged in Ukraine or in any area with Russia, I believe Northeast Asia could go. And that is not just Taiwan. It's not just semiconductors in Taiwan. This is the Philippines. This is what happened 83 years ago here in Hawaii, and all across on the other side of the international date line. All these countries were taken by the Empire of Japan. And now we saw, while we were at war for the last 20 years in the Middle East, what happened? Well, China built the biggest navy in the world, and it has not done all this social justice experimenting in their forces. And they're capable and they're ready to use their navy and their military and their advancements with their aerospace and their missile systems. I remember telling my friend this about 17 years ago, and now that it's been realized with their hypersonic missile launchers, their massive submarine fleet, their unmanned underwater vehicles. I mean, and if you look at the United States Navy, they allocated funding, and I believe it was 2002, right after 9/11, right after the big money ball hit. They allocated money to this LCS ship. It was a littoral class
Yeah,
ship,
at the
and
Zoom
there was
World.
originally 54 of them. There's not a mission for them. They look really cool.
It looked really cool with the Zoom Vault. Yeah, it looks like an
Yeah,
F-117 as a ship.
yeah, but they can't figure out what to do with them, and I think they've only built in the 30s, like 33, but they allocated for 54. But this is a huge slop program. And what I mean is, when China's playing 3D chess, we can't be out here, playing pickup basketball. It's a whole different, they're using their minds in a way that our imagination can't even contemplate. And they're prepared to dominate not just the Pacific. And that is what I'm talking about, Tommy, is we cannot afford, literally, our American way of life if all the global commodities, which, with due to the fixation with the wars in the Middle East that we were at for 20 years, China went around with a One Belt, One Road
Yeah, Belt
initiative.
and Road, and
You
yeah.
have 140 signatures, and all roads lead to Beijing. Now, Al Capone couldn't even broker good of deals as Xi Jinping made, and we've seen with Sri Lanka already. If you default, they'll take your resources, and
Well, that's the
uh,
whole that's the whole purpose is
yeah, it's a
just
win-win.
to
And
default.
yeah, when China's essentially checkmated us, they've locked us down with logistics for the next 100 years, not just in Africa or Asia, but I'm talking here in the Americas. Even allies such as Australia, they bought the rights to the port of Darwin. I mean, it's a shame that we've just been checkmated and not even known it. It's not something that the media talks about, because with this magic show, this misdirection, it's all about presidential politics. And the media learned really easily after Mr. Pearl, the reporter that got his head cut off in Afghanistan, like, hey, that's dangerous. you know what? Let's buy some locals. And that's what led to our case in A Few Bad Men, where they just trusted these unvetted sources in Taliban controlled towns. And then, because that's safer, your risk mitigation goes way down. Or let's just focus on presidential politics and hire these girls that are really pretty, and everybody, that'll increase the ratings and you get more money to advertising. But it's all focused on presidential politics and not on what is really happening around the globe that's threatening America presently and in the future, with our way of life. And economically, if we went to war with China, the COVID pandemic would look like, you've got a wart on your finger. It's very small in comparison to, now they control all the cards, all the resources, and with the BRICS, they can control the money supply. And our way of life instantly, nearly overnight, would just be upended.
Um, Tell everyone where to find the book. I gotta go piss, but there's a couple points I want to address, so I'll be right back.
Yes.
Tell everyone where to find the book and all that good stuff.
Okay, sure. Well, the book A Few Bad Men is the number one award-winning, best-selling book about our Marine Special Operations Task Force that was the very first task force that was organized at the direction of then Secretary of Defense, the late Donald Rumsfeld. After the organization, Marine Special Operations Command was activated in February 2006. We deployed in January 2007 to Afghanistan, into eastern Afghanistan, right along the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, near the Tora Bora Mountains, where Osama bin Laden was last seen. Our mission was to conduct aggressive combat operations in that area of Regional Command East. We worked for an Army colonel, Green Beret, and we were obviously seen by that Green Beret as competition. This is like you bringing your girlfriend home to meet your wife was not wanted or looked upon well. We were definitely not well received, so they kind of starved us out, not giving us any logistical resources to include food, water, and all the basics as far as repair parts for our vehicles, radios, weapon systems. And then the very first day that I landed in Afghanistan, I had a friend. He worked for, just call it another government agency, and he would attend meetings with the Army Green Berets daily. And he said, "Hey, Fred," and this guy used to work for me in force reconnaissance. He said, the Army in these meetings, they don't know who I am. I'm just a older guy with a beard, but I constantly hear them say, the first opportunity they have, they're going to kick you guys out of theater. And on our 30th mission, that's exactly what happened. We got into an ambush, and the Taliban sensationalized this. We went into this town. We saw the baseline change from where it was 3 hours before. They had a mass exodus of women and children. We knew. And then as we rolled back into this village, this is right on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So, as you know, we couldn't go into Pakistan. So that became a training sanctuary. So they would radicalize and train foreign fighters from all around the world in Pakistan. They'd come across the border and take this village called Badi Ko, where we were. Is essentially, um, this is like an Amazon fulfillment center. This is where all the products come in and they're distributed for that last mile of service, where there's Kandahar, Kabul, Sangin, Herat, all across Afghanistan is. But we entered this village, and obviously the Taliban and Al Qaeda wanted to keep Americans far away from the village of Badi Ko, their strategic distribution center. But we had knowledge of exactly where four of these suicide bombers were. We knew the exact house, and I can't say how we knew, but we had good knowledge. But the year prior, in 2006, this was the advent of the forever war. So, as you know, in the Bush 43 administration, what we had was you had Dick Cheney. And I'm not saying all perps or from the left. You had Cheney, who was involved in KBR and Halliburton and profiting from forever wars. And the war in Afghanistan, if you looked at what happened in 2000, 2003, 2004, 2005. It was wrapped up success story. I mean, it was Miller time and, high five celebrating. But when you make a decision that, hey, we're no longer going to allow, especially our special operations forces, to go out and prosecute the enemy when they have intelligence. We need them to, they introduced in 2006, and this was a joint doctrine from all U.S. services. It was developed by then three-star Lieutenant General Petraeus and then Lieutenant General Jim Mattis from the Marine Corps. This is Army Marine Corps joint doctrine called the counterinsurgency. They put it into a publication. They hijacked the Hippocratic Oath, the line in the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm. This is the winning hearts and minds. This failed strategy from Vietnam, they resurrected it, gave it a facelift. They hijacked this guy. I can't remember his name. Greg Mortensen is his name. Wrote this book, which was later discovered to be a complete fabrication, called 3 Cups of Tea, about how he built all these schools. And that's the mentality that they wanted our U.S. forces to go into these villages and sit down, have chai, conduct these tribal leader engagements, get to know them, kind of get your feng shui right. So when we had this information, like I said, we knew where these guys were, but as we entered this town, we were slowing down to have a tribal leader engagement as what was required. You could never, starting in 2007, you could not do what's called a level 2 mission, which is a mission which had the intention of being kinetic, going in to capture or kill terrorist leaders, which we had been doing nonstop up to that point from 2001 and to 2006. But as we rolled into this village, the complete baseline had changed. Mass exodus of women and children. We knew what was going to happen. Only military-aged fighting men lined up on the side of the road, and then a van filled with shrapnel and fuel detonated at the front of our patrol, knocked down the turret gunner in this Humvee. He fell inside the turret of the vehicle. He's on fire. Quickly stood up to his feet. He saw right to his left flank a sports utility vehicle driven by a jihadist with 3 other jihadists firing out their windows, AK-47s, fully automatic at our convoy. They're trying to T-bone and finish off our vehicle that was blown up. And I was in the convoy, saw it with my own eyes. This happened at 9 o'clock in the morning. So there's no fog of war timing. It wasn't like, what happened? I saw it live. And we thought that the second Humvee that got hit by the suicide van filled with explosives and fuel, it burned the trees 100 feet in the air. It was a massive, the largest car bomb I'd ever seen. But we thought everybody in that second Humvee was dead. And the Taliban came in to finish them off quickly. But this young sergeant, John Klein is the pseudonym in the book, he immediately did what Marine commandos do. He stood to his feet, and we initiated a counterattack and made very quick work of these jihadists in that vehicle. That the driver actually bailed out of that Toyota Prado into a ditch, and he continued to fight against us. And we killed the 3 jihadists that were firing at us. They were in the vehicle, and the vehicle came to a quick stop. But that driver who was continuing to fight against us, the driver was testified from an American base in 2008, the next year, during our court of inquiry, which is our war crimes tribunal. He testified that, he wants more compensation. He demands justice. And he said to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service investigators that came on scene 2 months after this ambush, 2 months, because where'd they go first? Well, they dogpiled on us as soon as they kicked us out of country when we were sent to Kuwait. The NCIS sent 45 criminal investigators, and they dogpiled on us. And that's not just what happened in Afghanistan, but there was people that did studies of the meteorologic, the actual armor of our vehicles and the bulletproof glass. There's 45 criminal investigators and 4 prosecuting attorneys that General James Mad Dog Mattis sent that unprecedented amount against the 7 of us who were falsely accused of murdering Afghan civilians. But anyway, to get back, the driver of that vehicle testified against us, even though he was paid salacious payments. This is an average of 4 years' salary for the average Afghan for 3 people that he said were killed in his vehicle. Then a year later, he swears to Allah in the court
All his
and
cash was
on the
destroyed.
Quran that now there's only two people that were killed, which he was. So Tommy, average American salary 52. So if you were paid $250,000 times three for family members in your vehicle that were killed, do you think less than a year later in court you'd forget that? Oh, now it was only two, and then you're demanding more money. So this again scandal spelt with dollar signs. This payout. This is how. This is part of the hearts and minds strategy. To was there incentive for Afghans to go in there? They required no proof that in our case, later on, they started doing things differently. But in our case, there on 4 March 2007, there was no bodies, no blood, no bullets, no pictures of bodies. Now, they did later show pictures in the media that were not of our ambush, but, this caused, the Taliban stirred riots that led to the provincial governor, Sharzai, complaining to President Hamid Karzai of Afghanistan, who condemned us publicly. American generals buckled very quickly. We were kicked out and sent into the longest war crimes trial, where of the seven of us accused, two of us stood trial and we were acquitted, but it took them 4 months to reach their decision where they announced it publicly. But this was, when you read the book A Few Bad Men, I don't want to tease the entire thing because it's something that people really have to read what was declassified in a courtroom trial to understand, like, these guys were set up by their own generals. Their generals intended to destroy them and pin them on. Because the Afghans said that we were drunk, that we got out of our vehicles, that we went door to door, sport killing civilians, and then we fled the area, they said, and then we came back and threatened the media, took their cameras, uh, picked up bullets, and they said we were sanitizing this space. So that was an entire lie. That General Mattis, who was the convening authority, basically the judge and jury, that he knew completely that this was a lie. He was the convening authority during the investigation, and he turned it. They had a change of command where after General Mattis basically sent this hit squad after us, 49 people total, 45 criminal investigators, 4 prosecuting attorneys that aimed at the seven of us, that boiled down to two of us. We don't go to war against those odds, Tommy. If you got almost 25 to 1 in a military court in the Marine Corps at the time, my attorney said, Fred, the conviction rate in a court, which we went to, is 96% conviction in the United States Marine Corps. The next highest in the world is People's Republic of China at 92%. And, this is, the max punishment is death in a case of mass murder. So this is a serious case, high stakes. And I don't want to tease the entire book, like I said, but your listeners and your viewers can order this on Amazon. It's on hardback, or they can listen to it on Audible they like, or some like to consume it on Kindle. It's also available on Kindle. Like I said, it's a #1 best-selling, award-winning book. It's a nonfiction book of what happened to U.S. Marines by U.S. Marines. And the most commonly used word in reviews of the book is disturbing.
Mm.
And you read these reviews, and it's really sad that none of these generals who did this were held accountable. What happened? Well, it's just like in Mattis's case. As soon as he, launched this dog pile of criminal investigators against us, he did what he was told. When the mob boss hands you a bat and you see your buddy with tape over his mouth, you're a wise guy. So what do you got to do? Well, if you want to continue to be in the mob, you better smash your buddy's head open because that's what the mob expects. Even though your buddy, who's your best friend, screaming underneath that tape, that's essentially what this equates to. Sorry for the graphic
Jeez.
terms, but that's what
No.
happened. It's disturbing. And but General Mattis got his 4-star immediately after launching this unprecedented level. There was other cases. Why they called ours the Marsoc 7 is there were 7 of us starting out, but there was the Haditha 8, the Hamdaniya 8, There was a case involving one Marine lieutenant in Fallujah, but the convening authority for all these cases was then Lieutenant General James Mattis, same guy that worked on the board of directors at Theranos, same guy that right now is on the board of directors at General Dynamics. Like you said, there's some people who, they'll take the money, and they'll keep taking the money. And when you read, I don't know, Tommy, if you've seen this book, I'm sure you've probably heard of this Green Beret mixed martial art fighter, Tommy Kennedy,
Yeah.
who was on active duty and went to the National Guard. But a lot of the Green Berets are calling him out right
Oh,
now
enough.
because
Yeah.
of maybe potential embellishing. But you read General Mattis's book, Call Sign Chaos, and I think anything that Kennedy did was so much more believable than this hoax of a story that, Mattis, who's this short, sawed off, weak guy with a pot belly and lisp, and um, he was saying how he was this tough, rugged guy that fell down this hill when after he went to officer candidate school there in Eastern Washington, and then he climbed to the top of this cliff that he'd just fallen down, and in the middle of winter, and he gets offered a ride, which he's in this truck, and then he decides to get out and hike the 3 days back in the middle of winter. Some of the stuff is, I mean, Kennedy's stuff is, yeah, you can sort of see it's, but the stuff that Mattis was talking about, completely unbelievable. And more importantly, like, where's the witnesses? Who is this driver? I mean, nobody knows all this stuff, but it just goes on and on in the story of make believe. I mean, I would encourage you and anybody else to believe in Peter Pan and Tinkerbell before some of the stories, and but that's who was sent. And again, like I mentioned in top of your show, the military doesn't promote the best. They're promoting the people who fully understand that the military is the best benefits package that they themselves could ever get into. They're not going to be a 50-year-old CEO or former CEO of United Healthcare. They're stuck in the military because it's going to give you housing allowance, food. They're going to give you a home if you're married on base. It's going to take care of you. You'll be able to see the world, move around, get a duty station in Germany or France, and Hawaii. They're going to take care of you very well as long as you do what they tell you to do. So that's a little bit about the book, A Few Bad Men.
Yeah, no, it's the betrayal is it's what it is. It's disturbing and it's disturbing betrayal. Um uh I want to send you an article I read earlier this year. It's about the AI system the Israeli Air Force was using for targeting called Lavender, and it's again I'm more interested in just like what it is. Pro against whatever. I don't give a fuck. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but the way they're using for targeting packages and everything, and then Lavender was made by Palantir, which is a U.S. company, and just like we export the F-35, but not the F-22 and the B-2, it stands to reason that we also don't export the best AI systems, which is already crazy because the Lavender one sounds so advanced, and not only would you use in my total lack of military experience, but you wouldn't just use AI for research or protein folding or, battlefield, I don't know, fronts and air support. You would also use it at like a strategic level, like big picture, a month, a year, 5 years, 10 years. When I look at, and it could just be an emergent phenomena that, what's it like the phenomenon pareidolia, where people see faces where they aren't, most notably clouds, but people with schizophrenia have it to a much greater degree where they see faces in everything. I might just be seeing something, but I feel like it's not at all. It's an odd coincidence if it is that we are hitting this exponential lip of national debt, 35, 36 trillion, another 100 or another trillion every 100 days. We're now spending more on um annual interest payments servicing the debt than we are the DOD. And we're clearly talking about how the DOD is the sacred cow. We have this debt that is coming due. We have rising China. I can't help but think it's not a coincidence that we're this close to World War III. Much like the Belt and Road Initiative, which they probably got that idea from the Bank of International Settlements. You give money, hey, we'll give you some 5G networks, we'll build you a warm water port, we'll build you some railroads, some colleges. You can't pay us back, don't worry. Give us the port, it's ours. And now China creates its own system of bases around the world, like we do. It feels like everything's right on the edge. Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Gaza, China, Taiwan, Africa writ large. Is Trump going to invade Mexico with, Delta Force? Conveniently, when our bill is coming due, to the point where it's no longer ignorable, that we got the bill at the table, it's more money than any of us have, and it's like, all right, somebody make a distraction, we're going to dine and dash. It kind of feels like if I took the most advanced AI and plugged it in and said, gave it the order, preserve American empire, what would come out? I would say it's probably going to say start World War III and wipe out your own debt. And I again, I don't know if I'm just seeing, if I'm projecting an image onto something, but I don't think it's coincidence that we're the service on our debt is now more than the DoD. We're adding a trillion every 100 days, and the entire world, the entire geopolitical chessboard seems like it's about to be flipped. I don't think it's a coincidence. And I think, as we've talked about in your own experiences with just MARSOC to the greater level of Smedley Butler, Eisenhower, Kennedy, whatever, the military industrial complex is willing to do anything to survive and grow. I don't, I, in no way would that exclude starting World War III to kick the can down the road another 50 years on empire and expansion. And not that you have the answer. I mean, wherever this is happening, if it's happening at the absolute highest levels of, whatever the fuck. But I don't think it's an accident. I really, hey, here, maybe I can explain it quicker this way. Whenever someone comes off the petrodollar or the US dollar, they end up getting freedom real quick. All right. But we've openly seen nations talking about BRICS the last couple of years, and they haven't received any freedom. And it makes me think of that scene, I think it's in White Men Can't Jump, where a guy gets embarrassed or something, and he just looks at them all and he goes, I'll be right back. And he walks over and goes, he's going to get a fucking gun, run. So it's like normally that guy punches people in the face right away. But if he gets real quiet and leaves, it's because he's going to get newsy. Normally, countries get fucked immediately when they go off the petrodollar. But all these countries have been talking about coming off the US dollar and the end of US hegemony for a couple of years, and America got real kind of quiet. And now all of a sudden we see regional wars starting all over the world. I don't think they're unrelated. And I know that's kind of a 180 divergence from talking about your book, but that's what I had on my mind when we were talking, and I wouldn't really use the
You're,
restroom. But it feels like
you're
America's
right,
going,
Tommy.
okay,
If you want
okay,
to follow the dollars, and you see how we've had these massive two consecutive natural disasters in the southeast of the United States, and Americans are barely, you know, I mean, it's almost like they're being pushed down to not be paid anything or just a pittance. And then President Biden's over in Angola giving out billions of dollars. I mean, you have to understand that that doesn't happen for without
yeah,
some kind of reason. And you've seen all this dirty money, when in the Obama administration, we give $50 billion back to Iran. We know what all these casualties that America has had, whether it's from 1983 and the Marine barracks in Hezbollah, the American embassy in 1983 that was attacked, that killed 17, that is Iranian backed, funded Hezbollah, And whether it's these little swift boats they have trying to take pop shots at our ships in the Arabian Gulf or the Houthi rebels, why has this administration currently, why has the Obama administration given funding to countries, whether it's Iran, whether it's, I mean, why, where is this money going in Angola? I mean, the last time that we had, when Obama was in the White House, we had these weapons, we saw what happened in Benghazi in Libya with, there's this arms deal and they were trying to make it seem like, hey, peace is breaking out. Well, we were actually funding a new war in Syria. Um, and it's a lot of people have become more aware of this. Tulsi Gabbard herself, and actually, I don't want to get into that right now, but people are talking about the warmongers. It's been very apparent that this isn't a natural evolution. This is something that is, being designed and created, and people are profiting from it. And, if you stop it, there's why are people so anxious? I mean, whether or not Iran sent somebody over here or a team to try to assassinate President Trump, but there's been multiple attempts here in just the past 4 months or 5 months to try to assassinate the president of the United States. It's just ridiculous, or the president-elect. But I think it all boils down to money and in Econ 101 when there's a current trend and that is going to be upset. Well, those empowered in the current trend will fight with everything they have to make sure the status quo remains because they don't want that. And I believe that's what we're seeing. And that's being seen right now this morning in Washington, D.C. with this fight with President Trump's first nomination for the Secretary of Defense. I mean, somebody that would go in there and completely clean house that, does he have an axe to grind? Sure. I mean, he was told to stand down, that he wouldn't be allowed to be in the inauguration of President Joe Biden. I mean, probably wasn't favorable for his career to have this tattoo on his chest. And but irregardless, our military is about profit. And you're right, Smedley Butler, Eisenhower, they all warned about this. And it is now in this day and age, it is more clear than ever about those that profit from war. And as Smedley Butler said, is I was the muscle in these banana wars down in Central America. And it's sad that we do not want to get involved in a war with Russia. We do not want to get involved in a war with China, but we have to have a strong and ready military. And when we can't recruit the amount of people that we need, and when we cannot focus on training, because the one thing that I learned, and I was just looking at this old memory of, I had to take this legal officer course, although I was not in law. I had to take this course right before I retired, and they said the number one problem in the United States Navy, and the Marine Corps as a department in the Navy, the men's department, and they said the number one problem is sexual assault. So while we had 2 wars going on, this is while I was on active duty before I retired, the biggest problem that we have is ourselves. And when we have women on the front lines, when we have all kinds of things, when you allow gays to openly serve, what you create is situations where people are living in barracks that are on bases, they're living in ships at sea, where that person has no privacy, and they're often coming back from liberty, whether it's over the weekend or in a port, intoxicated. And the facts are the facts. The biggest problem that we have is sexual assault. So how can we focus on our mission when we are at the cyclic rate? We are grabbing each other and doing these things that just put a commander in all this red tape, and he's doing these investigations and getting criminal investigators involved. And this is a whole business now, but it's not in America's national defense best interest at all. And I know these are hot button political topics that you're not supposed to talk about openly, but we need to. And that's why I really do hope that President Trump has has leaders who will not buckle, who will examine these things and make sure that we have a military that's designed to do what it's there to do, and that is to not just fight wars, but to win wars. So when diplomacy fails and you send the Marines in to wave that flag behind your left shoulder, Tommy, it requires somebody to put a bullet in somebody else's head. And
Hmm.
that may not sound nice on The View or
It's reality.
on the Oprah Winfrey show, but that's what our military is there to do. And it's not there to win hearts and minds.
Not there
That's
to build
State Department.
nations. It's what you said in the book. It's for putting up two in the chest and one in the brain box. It's
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
It's what it is. It's
Amen.
sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, it's like when I put my dog down, you don't my little brother made a good point. He was like, "You killed him." And I was like, "I put him down." He was like, "You killed him." And I was like, "I killed him." But it's what it is, right? Somebody doesn't pass on, they die. Somebody
Yes.
doesn't we're letting you go. No, you're fired. Get out of the building. That's what the US it's not it is what it is, and it should be wielded with great responsibility because it's inflicting clinical brain death is what it is.
Yes.
Everything else is decoration. And I hope he can build a team of, kind of the incorruptible because you do have to have it at that level. You have to. And it's not to derail it again. But what do you think the future of these conflicts looks like? And that I mean clearly it's drone warfare. I mean against infantry, against tanks. I mean, a drone swarm could probably take on an aircraft carrier, send 1,000, send 10,000, whatever.
That's what we're seeing right now off of the Gulf of Oman,
Hmm.
where uh, it's kind of what in a really ridiculous correlation, but how Reagan attrited Russia, just through spending. But when Iran has all this sophisticated drone technology, and they just buy all these cheap kamikaze drones and they send them out against our ships at sea, which we launch gladly. We launch $1 million missiles made by Lockheed, Northrop, Rockwell, all these companies. America doesn't seem to understand that a $200 drone with some high explosives on it is is a much better response than $1 million missile. But we have to, I know, and I was in some discussions with a company in Silicon Valley that was looking at drones and some advancements being used in modern warfare. But America is involved in developing this type of technology and will always be innovating. But it's sad to see that it's being so lucrative that AI, whether it's through Palantir or Tesla, is being looked at for military applications. And I'm not just talking about like future and space; it's talking about currently. So we will gain an edge, but everything is being turned to where we have to have the government, specifically the military. That is the big money. It's our Once you take out entitlements like Social Security, the Department of Defense is the number one spending line item on our federal budget. So this is big money where a lot of players, we're not talking like Social Security and Medicare, but this is where a lot of people can get involved in, the pay to play. And, they're using generals to get in the Pentagon. They're using generals to get up on Capitol Hill to wine and dine. Yeah, so you're right. But hopefully, can some of this be curbed? Again, I'm not a pacifist. I'm not Smedley Butler too, for sure. I mean, I believe uh, I came up with our task force call sign, task force violent. It's a that is how you deter aggression through violence. That's one thing our enemies know is not these personal pronouns like he, she, they. They understand he, and that stands for high explosives. And when you put warheads on foreheads, they get the point real quick when you accurately aim a projectile that kills the enemy. They, just like you've probably heard is it Wesley Hunt, the representative from Houston area, the district down there in Texas. He's was talking to on this podcast of when he was in the negotiations with Trump and the Taliban of, and Trump said, "Hey, here's a picture of your house because if there is a single American killed, he goes, and he just handed him that picture and left the room. And guess what? For the 18 months from when Trump handed that to him until the end of his election, there's not a single American killed. That's peace through strength. That's using strategy. That's using innovation. That's using courage. And that's what's lacking right now. You know, people talk all about tariffs and, you know, but Trump has an understanding as a business owner that, you know, you have to have a strategy to start with, and, you know, it's leverage. And will that be the case? I mean, it's just like when Reagan was in office, you know, people were a little concerned that this guy could be a little, you know, he could push the button. And that fear of being a wild card is strategic leverage. And that's right now what I believe. Nobody thinks Trump's crazy, or, you know, the arguments that the left makes, that's absurd. And it defies logic. Trump is a shrewd businessman. If he is illogical, if he's demented, then how come all of us can't be billionaires? I mean, all of us would, you know, benefit from that. Well, if it's so easy, you know, of course, you know, but he's not someone that, he's just somebody that has a different opinion than a lot of other people. And he's a billionaire. And with that usually comes a lot of uber confidence. And he is, um, you know, what the Germans call an Übermensch, a manly man. And some people in this day and age, they hate that, but he is the right person to, as he's already doing, to talk to heads of state around the world. And that is what we're going to need to resolve these and de-escalate through deterrence, instead of like what's been going on right now is finding ways that, you know, we can profit. Um, I will say this, Tommy, because I think it applies. When during the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, and forget the gentleman. He was in prison for a little while because Obama went after him, but is an Indian filmmaker. I'm sure you know he made this documentary. It was fabulous, but it showed how, and I know you know he's a
Dinesh?
academia. Vivesh, yes.
No, no,
So
the Dinesh D'Souza.
yes,
Yeah,
so he
yeah.
made this film, and it showed how Hillary Clinton would go to these countries, and she would talk to their heads of state and their head diplomats, and then later, like the next day or so, but while Hillary Clinton was there, he would come in, Bill. He started making these speeches that eventually got up to $500,000. Or sorry, some of it was like $500 million, so like $500 million. And then it got so brazen that you know, Vivek was showing that he would just go over on the plane with the Secretary of State, his wife, and give the speech while she was there, and no shame, come back. But this, I say that because that ended right after she was no longer the Secretary of State. Bill was not getting these high dollar speeches. And I say that because Exhibit B is Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden will no longer be on any boards at all on January 20th that are paying him like Burisma did, $83,000 a month. He will not be on any boards that involve China as he was. He doesn't have the experience, and that type of corruption will no longer go on. So, but I do think that that is going to force our next administration to, you know, be tough. And, you know, I think he's building a strong team with Senator Rubio, who will become the Secretary of State. I don't see any problem there with him being uh, approved by the Senate. And I think whoever ends up being the Secretary of Defense is, you know, we will be strong, and we will have a strategy to negotiate directly head of state to head of state and head diplomat to head diplomat, and using different levers to to achieve, our national, strategic objectives, and not have it be done through war and done through, this shadow government who's pulling the strings and shifting money. And what's been going on in this administration has, uh, like I said, giving money to Iran is just what a mistake. And allowing this war to go on, and not just giving over $100 billion to Ukraine, but then approving this last month. Joe Biden approved Zelensky to launch ATACMS
Yeah.
missiles
Into
into mainland Russia. And it's almost, we just literally, we always grew up, we prayed for peace in the Middle East. We need to pray for peace in Eastern Europe, and that we don't get dragged into a war, not just in the next 40 days, but here. Um, it's not in America's best interest to go to war, but we need to have our military restored. And that isn't just through technology, Tommy. That's through strong military leaders rebuilding, boots on the ground, being able to develop strategies to have low cost, high tech, advanced options, and to be able to utilize, um, where people understand that the threat is real when America brings to bear. And I'm not talking about nuclear options or EMPs, but we have to have strategies, and we have to develop programs that are more advanced than our enemies. And we should not be funding, terrorist state like Iran. We should not be, we should be doing everything to bring them to the table, or to dismantle them, and to use the United Nations or whoever, if the United Nations won't do it, we have to do it unilaterally. But the United Nations is not, they talk about, oh, Trump and our allies. Well, when our allies are indecisive, when our allies fail, then we have to do things, with our own, we cannot hesitate. We have to outcycle and outpace and perform. And that is how peace is started. But the United Nations isn't, they haven't certainly brought peace to the Middle East. They haven't done anything in Eastern Europe. And, if it went on the multiplier in a larger scale in Northeast Asia, well, let's let's not fool ourselves. It's not going to happen there either.
yeah, peace in the Euro East instead of the Middle East. Yeah, I don't. It's a tall order, but at the same time, it's, step by step. Trump won, and I feel like that's the first step, and it's just kind of one of the things you got to take day by day. Um, I don't mean to wrap it up abruptly. I have another show I got to start in a couple minutes. Um, but for everybody listening, please go in the description. Please go grab the book. I listen to it on Audible. You can listen to it however you want, or read it however you want. Um, but yeah, man, I like talking to you. I like having you on, dude. You're a brilliant dude. I genuinely appreciate it, and thank you for your patience with my scatterbrained topic jumping. I'd have no idea how to stay on a singular topic, so I appreciate your patience with that.
In the same way, I appreciate it. And I'm just a knuckle dragger from Eastern Kansas that learned to walk upright. And, but thank you for having me on your show as your guest again, and
Absolutely,
love to
dude.
anytime in the future.
Absolutely. Don't be a stranger. Shoot me a text. And yeah, guys, please go in the description. Please go grab the book. Major Galvin, thank you so much for your time, sir. That was awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All
God
right,
bless you.
brother. God bless. Guys, thank you so much.